Welcome to another interview in the USA section of the International College of Dentists project of chronicling the leaders in dentistry. Today we are honored to have the Executive Director of the American Dental Association, Dr. James B. Bramson. Welcome, Jim. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dick.
I know how you're running around this country and doing the job that we're pleased that you're doing.
Thank you.
Let us start the interview because the first part of it I want to find out who you are. What makes you tick, how your family's doing, what your background is, and then we'll talk maybe a little bit about issues which you're working with daily.
Sure.
Let's start at the beginning. Tell me about Mom and Dad. Tell me about, I know you're from Iowa.
I'm from a small town in Iowa, a little town called Moville, Iowa. So that's near Sioux City, Iowa, town of about 12 or 1,300 people, something like that. My father was the editor and publisher of the local newspaper. So it was a rural community. It worked basically in support of, the farming community that surrounded that. A little bit like Mayberry, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. My dad worked and worked and worked and worked. Running a local weekly newspaper, you were just never really away from another issue. You barely get one out, and you were starting another one. And then he had a job printing business. My mother worked down there, too. My father passed away several years ago. My mother's still living, pushing 86 now, doing great, living in her own house. So the only problem is I'm 8 hours away, so it's a little hard to get out there anymore.
Did either of them have any advanced education?
No. My father actually, they both finished high school. My mother took a couple of years at Westmar College in Lamars, Iowa. My father took some technical training that went along with his printing business, those kinds of courses, but no college educations to speak of, or completed college educations. And while I enjoyed what I thought my father was doing, I just didn't see myself doing it. My brother went into printing. I have one brother. But he really didn't want to come back and take over Dad's business, and neither did I. And there weren't many professionals in our small town. There was one dentist and one lawyer, no physicians, and really those were the only two professional people there. The dentist was a really nice guy. And I sort of announced when I was 8 years old I wanted to be a dentist.
Really?
Proudly told that to my parents, and my mother was proud, and my brother thought I was crazy, and my father just, got to worrying, well, who's going to take over my business, basically. But, he got over that. He sold it to a nice gentleman. And so I like science. The dentist in town he'd take me back in the lab, let me hang out there a little bit. And it just seemed like, a nice lifestyle. He was a nice man. He was connected in the community, respected in the community, and I thought, well, what's wrong with that? That would be an awful nice way to live your life. So that was my dream, was to just be a general dentist, to practice. And after I finished dental school, I started a scratch dental practice in another small town in Iowa, a little town called Parkersburg, Iowa, which is near Waterloo, Iowa. My wife is from Dubuque, Iowa, so we sort of got
it right in the town.
We got the state sort of covered. She went to school at Iowa State University, and I went to school at Iowa University, so we pretty much covered the whole state one way or another. So I practiced in a little town that had about 1,800 people in it. There was another gentleman up the street, and then there was another dentist 13 miles away in another town, and we were the only 3 dentists for the whole county. So, as you can imagine, and this was back in 1979, as you can imagine, I was busy, just busier as all get-outs. Interestingly enough, I started a scratch dental practice, and I had 15 patients my first day.
Wow.
I had worked this community a lot when I was a senior in dental school. Was going up there on the weekends, joined the civic organizations, the Rotary Club, and that, even while I was a senior in dental school. So, I just thought, if I was part of the community, I'd be accepted easier and better and faster, and I wanted my practice to take off, and sure enough, it did. So, that was really all I really ever wanted to do.
So you, at 8 years old, you said, I want to be a dentist.
I said that.
That may be a record.
Well, that might be. That might be, but my mother would verify that for you.
Was that a pretty good time for you? Were you a happy kid? I mean,
sure.
What do you recall?
Sure.
That was good, good time. How about aunts and uncles? Did they live close, or did you have
a few? The families weren't all that large. It was a great time. I mean, as I say, the town was wonderful. I make this analogy that for small towns, I think they're a wonderful place. I think the quality of life is great, and I think what happened was, after I went off to dental school and I practiced for a while in a small town, I sort of had this itch to, get somewhere else.
Get out of there.
And that's not a knock on small towns, but it's a little bit like this analogy. I used the term earlier. I said it's a little bit like Mayberry, and I've also told people that, growing up like Opie is a little different than living there as Andy, in the
That's
sense
good,
of what a child sees, what a child gets out of those communities, what an adult is looking for there. So, I sort of, after it was about 5 years into my practice, I said to my wife one day, she's a very, very bright lady, I said to her, I just came home from the office here today and I did this really extraordinary, we were using pins back then, this pin amalgam buildup that, I mean, it was beautiful. It was probably, one of the nicest, crown buildups that I'd ever done. And I said to her, geez, honey, I'm not sure that I can technically do anything better than that. And she said to me, well, then you better find something else to do. Yeah. And I think what she saw was that, I was happy doing the dentistry, but that I was feeling challenged after 4 or 5 years in this practice. We do that to ourselves. We spend a lot of time sort of narrowing down our scope and then wondering, how do I feel comfortable inside this narrower, area? And so, with the help of the gentleman who was 13 miles up the road from me.
And what was his name?
His name was George North, Dr. George North. George was hauling me off to dental meetings all the time. So, everybody needs a mentor. Maybe they need 2 or 3. And George was one of mine in the sense that I did a preceptorship in his office when I was in dental school. And he was very active in the Iowa Dental Association, and he started saying, why don't you come along with me to these dental meetings? He got me involved in a local study club where there was about 11 of us that were, together. So, I was in the community, so to speak, the dental community. And I was saying to him one day when we were driving to a dental meeting, I said, George, there's got to be something else here. I really enjoy some of the stuff I'm doing for the association. We were working on a pretty large dental assisting project at the time. And he said to me, well, have you ever heard of this fellowship that ADA and the American Fund for Dental Health put on? And I said, no, I have no idea. I don't know what you're talking about. So he said, I think you should take a look at it. I think you'd be good at it. And that was the Hillenbrand Fellowship.
Let me go back to dental school a little bit here, because it's an interesting, having done these interviews, it's interesting to note people's reaction to dental school. I can recall the frustrations with guys that tried to be hard on you and crack things up.
Right.
What was your impression of dental school? Was that good days for you, bad days?
We had, it was an incredible environment. The dean at the University of Iowa was Jim McLaren, so people probably will recognize that name. I guess I saw him as an approachable icon. I'll put it in that way. Door was open. You'd see him walking around the schools. It wasn't like it was impossible to meet with him, and when you'd see him, you could have a conversation. He created an environment that said, let's all get together and learn. I think his faculty took that, mantra. Dr. Dennehy was there, who still teaches there, was always a wonderful practitioner. I remember the early on waxing labs, which is typically the place where, you know, if they don't like it, they'll squeeze it between their fingers and send you off to do it again. And, you know, we had great instructors, wonderful class of kids. And interestingly enough, the year I got into the University of Iowa was the first year that the dental school did not conduct interviews of applicants for the dental class. And then after our class, they started doing it again. So I don't know what that means.
You fixed them, yeah.
Well, I don't know. But, you know, we did have a very unique class, a wonderful group of guys and gals. The environment was really, really professional.
Yes.
And so I came out of that without any of the baggage that I hear occasionally from some folks of my age who maybe were in environment. So I'm really happy to see that. I think that's changing and has changed a lot. Well, I know that it is because I talk to students all around the country now, and I know most of the deans around the dental schools, and I've watched what goes on in these schools over the last 15 or 20 years, and I think it's an
and all the old guys have died.
Incredibly different environment now than it was. So dental school for me was fabulous, you know.
And were any of those instructors really sort of a beginning mentor for you, or you'd already decided what you were doing and where you were going?
Well, I don't think necessarily individually, but I think collectively.
All right.
I think we found that collectively as a faculty, they were all somewhat of like mind in that they cared about their students. They take time to make sure they'd answer your questions. I didn't really ever get the feeling that we were being sort of demeaned or different levels. It was very much, even at that point, sort of it felt like to us as students more of a peer-to-peer, you know, contact. So it was a good environment for me.
And then right to private practice.
And I went right straight into private practice.
And then you set up more than one office.
I did. About 3 years into practice, I said, you know, I really like the sort of business parts of running this operation. I think I'm becoming technically pretty proficient, so let's see if I can become a much better business person. And I went back to school to get an MBA. I started going to school at the University of Northern Iowa at night to pick up an MBA. I was an officer in the Rotary Club. I can't remember what. I was either vice president or treasurer or something like that. And I was in the JCs, and I was in the Lions Club.
You've been in them all.
And started going back to school one night a week to get some of the background courses that you typically need to have before you took the graduate level business courses. So when I started this MBA program, I knew at the rate that I was going to be able to go, which was the fall and the spring semesters, I was going to take the summers off. It was going to take, you know, a while to get it done. In the meantime, one of the fellows who was in the study club that I was in had an office in Ackley, Iowa, which was about, I don't know, 15, 16 miles straight west of where I was at. And he had been in the Navy and decided he wanted to go back to the Navy. So he put his practice up for sale, and after a little while, you know, we negotiated it, and I bought his practice. So I started working a satellite practice, as well as, you know, the one that I had. So I was going to school one night a week, I was running 2 practices, and I was doing all of this kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, I gave up my Wednesdays and sometimes a Saturday morning to work over in this other practice. And I don't know whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, you know, in the sense of, you know, what it took away from sort of the time. I always used to make a joke. I loved having Wednesdays off because I was never more than one day away from a day off. And, you know, from the sort of stress that goes on in the dental office, you know, it's important to sort of manage that well. And manage it by working in another dental office doesn't necessarily manage that all that well. So a lot of that sort of came together. The town fathers came to me and said, we want to run you for school board. We think you'd be great on the school board. And that was the one I said, I don't think so. I don't think I'd be that good on your school board, and here's why. because I think you put too much emphasis on your athletics and not your academics in this town. Not that it's not good for kids to, have organized sports, but, there's a lot more to it here. And I don't think that I'd probably do well. So I declined that. And as I say, I was driving to this dental meeting with George one day, and he talked about this fellowship. And I checked into it, and I thought, that sort of marries this opportunity to sort of broaden your scope. It gives you a chance to say, instead of I'm treating 2,000 patients by touching them, I can treat 200,000 patients or 2 million patients in a vicarious way, which was kind of exciting to me at the time. The thought to be involved in sort of guiding positions like that. I had really no clue where this fellowship would go, so I put an application into it.
1986.
Well, that's when I received the fellowship.
Oh, okay.
As I say, it was a couple years before. It was probably in '84 when I sort of said, I got to look around a little bit. I looked for some research positions. I made an application for NIH had a dentist scientist program going on back then, which was a 5 years master's PhD program in a research in dental science. I made an application for some of that. Thought I was going to go do that. Had actually been accepted to one of those programs at the Eastman Clinic, and then some of the funding got removed, and I had to wait a year, and I ended up going to Chicago on this fellowship, which finished in '86. And one of the fellows who was there, probably a fellow that I probably learned the most from, was a guy named Michael Parrish, who was my division head at the ADA.
Minnesota or
he was from California.
Okay.
And the ADA offered me a job when I finished my fellowship, which was perhaps a little unique. Most of the people who have gone through that fellowship either went back into the insurance industry somehow. The earlier candidates did that, I think partly because the service corporations were growing back when that fellowship first started, and it was a place where dentists were needed. Sure. And then a lot of people that came to the Hillenbrand Fellowship came out of academia and then went back into academia at a different track as an associate dean or something like that, because their goal was typically to become the dean of dental school or something like that. I ended up staying at the ADA. I don't think any other fellows
Council
have
of
done
Dental Practice?
I started in the Council on Dental Practice. Okay. I mean, I did my fellowship work in the Council on Insurance, but I started working in the Council on Dental Practice as what was then called the Assistant Secretary. That would be like an Assistant Director today, same position. Working on practice-related projects, practice management projects, practice management seminars, books, resources, things of that nature. And then slowly they began to sort of pile things on, took over the relief fund and took over the disaster fund, and shortly after I took that over, they lost their tax exemption in the disaster fund, and we had to look for some other way to deal with that, so we created the ADA Endowment Assistance Fund, which was all that was merged into our foundation here recently, but I started that. And eventually they made me director of the council. So
that private practice in Iowa sort of went away, didn't it?
Well, it did. It did, but I felt like I used it every day.
No, I think that your private practice time has been very valuable, especially where you are now.
Yeah.
That I would commend people to look at that, because you can appreciate things differently.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times young dentists today carry a pretty good sized yoke with them when they first come out of dental school, thinking, I have a 2-month window to decide what I'm going to do forever. Yeah. The rest of my life has to get sort of figured out now. I either go this way or I go this way, or if I start a practice, then I buy the stuff.
The ADA has a program along with the International College of Options in Dentistry through North Carolina.
It's called the Success Program now.
And it's important to have the students look at that.
Most careers, people change jobs about every 5 or 6 years.
At least. Yeah.
And in dentistry, we tend to think of you get one chance to make sort of a lifelong decision. And I think the one thing I learned was that all of the time I spent in private practice was very beneficial to help build that skill set. Then I went out to the Massachusetts Dental Society. I was the executive director out there for nearly 5 years.
You
before
didn't like the Midwest anymore. You had to get to the East Coast.
Well, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. I mean, Massachusetts, and to this day, I love the state and I love the people out there. They really warmly received me, and it was a state that had enough size and resources that you could do some pretty interesting things as an associate or as an executive director. So when I did that, I came back to the ADA about 5 years ago now, and I tell a lot of people, I tell my staff and I tell a lot of the members that I think the background is sort of like a three-legged stool, in that as I sit on that, I try to remember that, well, one of those legs is the leg when I was out practicing dentistry.
Yeah.
And if I was still out practicing dentistry and the ADA was doing something, whether it was a book or a policy or something, I'd sort of look at it and I say, now if I was still practicing, could I use this? Would it be valuable? Could I become a better dentist by this resource the ADA is using? The second leg of that stool is sort of when I was down in the building trying to develop that same resource, asking that same question. What was the task that was asked of me? What is it that the association could produce that would be the most useful kind of product, so to speak? And then when I was in Massachusetts, obviously I was somewhat of an intermediary in using ADA resources. I would get those resources already developed and say, now my job is to try to figure out how do my members in Massachusetts use these kinds of resources. So I try to put that hat on differently when we look at the things we're doing at the ADA and the projects we're doing and see, does it satisfy those three legs? Could a staffer figure out what to do? Could a state use this resource? Could a practitioner become better with it? And if the answer is yes to those, then those seem like the kinds of things that the ADA ought to be doing, and those are the easy things to say yes to. So it's my job, I tell a lot of people, my job is to find a way to say yes for all the good things that come down the pike.
So this was in 2001 when you accepted the position of executive director of our wonderful association. Having been a life retired member, I kind of like the group. I've been member since '56.
And thank you for that.
Well, and I've enjoyed and played. I was involved pretty heavily for a while. Now, as you went to the ADA, you had goals, I would assume, because that's probably some of the interview that they would ask you. Having served in organized dentistry in Massachusetts, I'm sure you could say, well, listen, if they would have done this, maybe it would help my people. And you said the three-legged stool, which I think is a perfect example. What were some of your goals when you were getting back? Because I can recall your predecessor had some interesting things going on, which I totally didn't agree with, but that I was just a retired dude.
Right.
Did you have those goals that you've been able to work with?
Sure. I had several, but I think they boil down to a couple things. I had been inside the organization, and I knew what kind of people were there. Many of the people that I worked with when I left were still there.
Yes.
I knew what kinds of talent they had, and one of my goals was to tap into that talent and let those people bloom a little bit more. Had a really, it's a sort of an aside, but had a really nice lady that was working for us in Massachusetts that I think her supervisor had sort of kept a little bit more controlled. And when that person left the association, we got she got a new boss. Basically shined some light on this young woman, and it was amazing to see her bloom. Yeah. People have that innate character lots of times, that ability to really rise to the occasion, and I knew that was inside the staffers at the ADA. So one of my jobs was going to be to try to get out of their way, to try to make sure that they could do their job, so to speak. We hire them because they have a lot of skills and talents. They couldn't even get that job if they didn't have those skills and talent. Okay, so let's let them use it.
Sure.
So that was the first thing, and the second thing is that I thought what we could do is be better listeners. That people are giving us a lot of good ideas, and sometimes the best thing to do is to listen carefully. If you do that to a lot of good ideas, you're going to find inside of there the sort of consensus of doing that. So I thought the organization needed to be a better listening organization, and sometimes all that means is that you just stop talking.
Dentists can do that. Talk.
Well, I think we tend to. This is a philosophy that I have. I don't know whether it's accurate or not, but I think there's two kinds of problems in the world. There's convergent problems and there's divergent problems. And convergent problems are the kind that there's only one solution or answer for. Most of those are science-based problems. So as dentists, we spend all of our time and all of our training and all of our skills learning how to serve convergent problems. We control for 9 variables, test for 1, nothing happened. Okay, that can't be at issue here. We've got to test for something else. So we have this very scientific mind thinking, okay? The other kinds of the world's problems, and the problems that are mostly the ADA's problems, are what's known as divergent problems, and they have multiple solutions. So when you take a whole group of people who are primarily skilled in convergent problem-solving skills and then impose a divergent problem on top of them, they struggle sometimes.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we've tried to do a lot at the ADA is help our leaders and our councils and our staffers understand that most of the policy-based issues that the association looks at are those kinds of problems.
Yes.
Where you need to take a step back and bring in lots of other folks who can analyze a problem a little bit differently than sometimes we do. That's what's critical about listening. If you're listening to people who go about solving their skills or solving their problems a little bit differently, you're going to find sort of that new common area that you hadn't thought about and that they hadn't thought about, because your problem-solving skill set doesn't sometimes let you get there. So we spent a lot of time, on that. And probably the third major goal that I had when I came there was to try to improve the working relationships with our state organizations. Yeah. Being out in one of those states who clearly understood what resources the ADA had that I thought we could tap, it seemed to me the ADA could be a really wonderful, better, and more useful resource for the state, because, not all the work goes down at 211 East Chicago. The majority of what's going on in dentistry happens out in the state, or at the local level.
Let me jump out of dentistry just for a second, because I know it's very important to you. Let's talk about your family. I know you got a wife and 3 kids. Tell me about her and the 3 kids.
Sure.
Is it 2 boys and a girl?
2 boys and a girl.
Yeah. Tell me what they're doing and all about them, because I know that's important.
My wife is by training, she was a textiles and clothing major. Ran a department store for a while when we were first married. The world of retailing doesn't sort of lend itself to a great family life at times, because you're always in the middle of a sale, or you're always in the middle of an inventory, or you're working, New Year's, that kind of stuff. So we sort of sat down and said, maybe there's something else. And she sort of transitioned into the savings and loan business, was an assistant vice president for a savings and loan in our small town. Got real involved in lending opportunities, and spent most of her career as in the mortgage lending business, underwriting home loans. So she sort of morphed this retailing skill set into the financial background of that. Did that pretty much all through the time where we were even out in Massachusetts. Oh. When we moved back to Chicago, when I took this job, it just, the time commitments and the travel commitments just didn't seem to fit well with what would be an organized full-time or even an organized part-time job. So she's, at home now. My oldest boy is a bond trader for UBS in Chicago. Was a finance major at the University of Illinois. Has been out about 3 years. My middle boy.
This is Matthew.
This is Matthew. My older boy is Adam. Middle boy Matthew is graduating from the Indiana University week from Saturday. Oh. So all the family's coming in to go down there to do that. So 2 out of 3 are checked off, and the only one that's left is my daughter, Lauren, who's going to be a freshman in high school. She's talking about wanting to be an actress, which is interesting, and I keep telling her to take enough science courses so you can go to dental school if you need something to fall back on. So I thought maybe my second boy might be a little more interested in dental school, but
now, is Adam married? He's your oldest.
No, he's not married.
Okay.
None of them are married. He lives in Chicago, and we see him a lot. He and I play, and my other boy, we play a fair amount of golf together on the weekends, so it's a great family activity. And my daughter's just taking it up, so we do that a lot.
So if I said, Jim, what are your hobbies? What would you say?
I play golf. I like to read. Gardening to some extent, you know. I like working around the yard.
You have to like travel. You probably
well,
don't.
Well, you know, the novelty of travel wears off pretty quickly.
I've been there, done that.
You know, I don't know how many air miles a year I put on, but it's a lot. It was, and it's different kind of travel now for me. The first couple of years, I spent a lot of time traveling out to our states to make sure that I got to connect with them a little bit better. Once we sort of got, you know, a little better basis for that, it seems like a little bit more of my travel these days is connected with some of the budding corporate relationships that the association is growing. If we're in the relationship business, which I think you are when you run an association, it takes a lot of time to manage and nurture those relationships.
Yes, it does.
So, and you can't do that by email or hanging
eyeball to eyeball in it.
Which is a part of a philosophy. My chief operating officer is a gal named Mary Logan, who used to be at the ADA in our legal division and then left, and then we hired her back. While it doesn't sort of parse out exactly this way, it does sort of in conceptual form. Is that I think at the ADA there's two kinds of jobs when you get up to the level that I'm at. There's sort of the inside job and there's sort of the outside job. And the inside job means that somebody's got to be making sure the committees are coming together, making sure the work is progressing, making sure that the paperwork is done, the human resources issues, the hiring, the structural, you know, all the sort of operational issues, you know, the plumbing of the organization, so to speak. And there's a lot of that. You know, the ADA is a pretty good-sized organization.
It is.
And sort of managing those operations takes a lot. If you spend all of your time sort of doing that, which it can consume all of that, you really don't have a lot of time to go outside the organization.
Yeah.
So we sort of parsed the jobs a little bit in that I see my job as overseeing the internal operations, but spending a fair amount of time external, building relationships, meeting with people.
Well, you are the organization, let's face it, always has.
And then I've asked Mary to spend less time sort of traveling and more time sort of watching the operations. And I really think that sort of in that kind of a relationship, it allows the organization to keep, you know, moving a little better and faster. If the operational elements of the ADA just sort of went on hold while I was out on a 2 or 3 day business trip for one reason or another, then the ADA is not moving forward. I mean, the members are going to notice that kind of stuff. So, you know, to be nimble and progressive, you know, I think we have to sort of do that. So that's the structure we put together. So yeah, I do travel a lot, and you know,
well, you should.
It gets a little old at times, but you know, then I get a chance to come in here and interview
That's
with
right,
you.
and we loved it. Now, have I missed anything in your life that you think was significant? Because I want to talk about several issues of facing your organization and the profession, and get your ideas of how you're going to approach these or how we are approaching them. Because
I don't think so. I think that sort of covers the waterfront.
Let's then go into some major issues that I hear. Of course, I'm kind of out of it now, but I hear I get to talk to some residents and several things. What are we doing on the national board exam now? Where are we sitting with that?
Well, I think about a year ago there was a lot of movement. There was a lot of action going on. the sort of ADEX community was coming together. The REB community was together with that and then separated from that. But there was a lot of talk then about broader movement towards a single national examination. And that is consistent with our policy. I think we all believe that that would make good sense if we got to that. That doesn't call for national licensure, so to speak. It just calls for some standardized national licensing exam that individual states and different authorities.
We used to have the national boards. I took them. And,
well, we do.
And we still have those.
Yeah, there's part 1 and part 2, but those are cognitive.
Those are purely,
those are for basic sciences and clinical sciences. But the actual clinical examination itself, was still done by regional boards or individual states doing their testing.
And the states would have the right still to put the license on.
And they still do.
And they still do. Because that's a state.
So there seemed to be a lot of movement throughout the country. States were beginning to more readily accept licensure by credentials, reciprocity. I think there were 47 or 48 states that were participating in credentialing or reciprocity. So the whole concept of sort of the ability of dentists to more freely move around was being captured somewhat on a state-by-state basis by movement there. The ADA had a policy that encouraged mutual recognition of multiple exams, so what we found that a lot of states were beginning to recognize, for example, the NERBs and credits and Western Rebs or something like that. So, it wasn't unusual to see a state say, you can satisfy our state licensing requirements by being a successful matriculant of the NERBs or the REB or something like that. We don't have to necessarily pick one of them. So I think, all saw that as really advancing the sort of age-old issue that we've had about, what's the difference between, a dentist in Pennsylvania and a dentist in Colorado with respect to their skill sets, and the answer is probably not very much.
Yeah. And the younger person really
wants that. So, I was very encouraged as we saw more and more states credentialing, as we saw more and more states accept mutual recognition, that in fact we were beginning to move towards that. And it seemed like the sort of tipping point came together when there was this broader call for more single clinical examinations. And then over the past year, it seems like that's really begun to fall by the wayside.
Really?
There has been a sort of a reverse of that a little bit, and I have some speculation as to what's going on there, but I don't know whether that's true or not. I think that what we've seen in some states who used to recognize multiple exams, they've reversed to recognizing only a single exam. Okay. The whole concept of bringing everybody together under the single ADEX structure, which I think philosophically, there was a lot of people who said, yeah, that philosophically makes sense. That hasn't materialized. There's still this differences of opinion as to what should be that sort of single examination and who should run it and where it should be housed and all the other things that go with that. So, frankly, I was really encouraged a year or so ago that I thought we were getting closer to what our policy directs and what I think that the vast majority of the members think is a good idea, and clearly what's something that the young members would say is long overdue.
Sure.
And then I'd say in the last year or so, it looks like that's taken a little side turn. So I don't write that off as not being able to be, corrected, so to speak. I just think one of the things that doesn't happen in policy-based work is that it's never a straight line.
Yeah, right.
You don't get from A to B. And so we're on a course from A to B, it seems to me, and we've just taken a little detour there for a little while. We'll all fix that. We'll all get around to understanding, what's there. We'll all find a way, to do that. And I think that points out something that is important for those who work in administration like me is that you have to have a lot of patience to do this job, because what seems like the really logical, just sort of straightforward thing to do that gee, this makes perfect clear sense to me or you or somebody else, how come everybody else doesn't see it quite that same way? And that is the beauty of the ADA, and it's probably its Achilles heel at the same time. You know, the beauty of the ADA is it creates this community where everybody gets a voice. And its Achilles heel is that everybody's got a voice, which isn't bad. It's just that finding the consensus opinion is hard to do. Now, consensus around hard science isn't all that tough for us to do. We can say, well, the data shows this. But when we're dealing with policy kinds of things, finding that consensus where there's enough critical mass that everybody says, yep, that's exactly what makes us all comfortable, that's exactly what's going to work for us, let's move forward with that. You know, I think that's what, you know, my job is that, you know, how do I try to keep taking all the input that we get and bringing the forces together for the kinds of debate that needs to go on so that that consensus can happen. And it's messy. You know, the margins are real messy when you do that kind of work.
Let me bring up another subject which I hear routinely is a difficult one, and I think, I'm not sure, I think the ADA has a solution. We are very short of qualified teachers, especially specialists in our dental schools. I'd heard one time we were 300 or 400 short.
Right.
And you're approaching that in a different manner now, it's my impression. Relate on that a little bit.
Well, I think you're correct on the presumption that you just made, is that the data that we see, this data typically comes out of the American Dental Education Association, and it varies a little bit, but there's somewhere in the range of about 300 open faculty positions around the country. When we first started looking at this, there were over 400. Now, some people would say, oh, that's great, they've improved. Well, what's really happened in most of those instances is those jobs have just been eliminated. Those lines have been taken out of the budget, so it's not like they've been filled. Private practice is pretty lucrative these days.
Oh.
So, you know, certain specialists at a dental school may find that, gee, there's a really interesting and viable and economically desirable opportunity that someone's presented to me, maybe I'll go do that. So with a lot of the discussions about, you know, the educational cost, you know, how much does it cost to educate a dentist, how long is the curriculum, what are the demands on faculty, what are some of the ways that faculty could supplement those incomes, those are all sort of things that have been talked about. What we started at the ADA was we took a vision that Art Degoni had about 15 or 20 years ago. And Art Degoni's vision back then was to create $1 billion endowment for dental education, a resource to help fund the innovation and the change that, you know, he saw dental education needing. A lot of schools have done little parts of that by endowed chairs and things of that particular nature. But on a coordinated national effort, our foundation said, this is a role that we can help play. We need to help educate dentists and the public that dental education is at some risk. Good dentists require good faculty to become good dentists, and we all have a stake in that. The profession has a stake in that. The members have, the retired members, the faculty, and the public's got a big stake in that too. So we accepted that challenge. We formed underneath our foundation a national campaign for dental education, and that is an umbrella concept. And by that I mean dental schools, foundations, the ADA Foundation, all can fit under this umbrella, all trying to raise money for dental education, with the ultimate goal of $500 million in the next 12 years and $1 billion in 25 years. Inside of that umbrella, the ADA Foundation itself will be operating its own fundraising campaign. We hope to raise $100 million of that $1 billion ourselves and dedicate most of our funding to innovation in dental education. Many of the schools are still maybe there's a capital campaign for a wing on the school.
Sure.
Maybe it's and they're recruiting money for a scholarship program or something like that. That's fine. We have no problem with that. That all can gross up into the sort of larger amounts that we need. So in our view, this isn't a competitive fundraising concept. It's a collaborative fundraising concept.
Using corporate giving and everything
well, there's
you
corporate,
can get.
but
yeah.
there's, you know,
Foundation,
dentists, life gifts, you know, there's all kinds of ways to kind of take a look at this. So our thought at the ADA was that we would help provide the structure and framework for the kinds of fundraising that the schools are doing already, and help them with materials to do that better if they choose to do that, and still carve out an area where we did some of our own brand new fundraising in an attempt to drive some resources to the kinds of innovation that many of the schools say they'd like to do, but that they're strapped financially and just can't do themselves. So we think we've carved out a nice niche for everybody underneath this umbrella, and we'll be going public with that campaign next summer. It's in sort of a private, quiet phase now. We're staffing up for it. We've had early major gifts, and we continue to try to identify major prospects that we can work on that. So, you know, this isn't something that, you know, tomorrow you're going to have $1 billion in the bank.
That's right. No.
But, you know, who's the old guy? Everett Dirksen, I think, you know, a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon that turns into a lot of money. And so I think we have to make sure that the profession understands that if you want this to be a healthy, viable profession going forward, you have a role in giving back.
And the education is the basic thing where we
It's
must.
the foundation for our profession.
Yeah, we got to
Absolutely. So if you don't believe in this, you know, what could you believe in
and there
for our
won't be anything to
profession?
follow you. I mean,
Right.
Another question, and an issue which I think is probably facing the American Dental Association. Today, people are much smarter. Today, people are more demanding. The consumerization of public, of our patients, is much more difficult.
Absolutely.
And it's certainly got to be an issue which you're facing.
Yeah, I don't know if people are that much smarter. It's just that people have better access
more
to
information.
more information. Information that they didn't have in the past.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of it they'll get through public sources like the internet. So, in some respects, that's wonderful in that people get more information about a topic, and in other respects, you know, there's no internet police going on out there to sort of answer the question of what's accurate.
Yeah.
So it gives a forum for a lot of inaccurate information to get pushed around, shrouded in what looks to be some credible source of delivering that.
But the amalgam issue just coming out this week was excellent.
It was excellent.
Excellent.
That was very good.
Yeah.
So, you know, we talk at the ADA a lot about what an incredible opportunity that we have at the association to be a validator of credible information, a source that can make sure that information is reliable and accurate, so that when somebody comes to our source, we can say that to the best of our knowledge, this is accurate. And it points out something that I think the association has to learn to do better. I think we're making progress on this, but we've still got a ways to go, is that the ADA used to be an organization that until every bit of understanding was known on a science issue, they would hold off making any commentary or statements or policy positions, because as scientists they would say, we still don't know for sure. We're just not quite sure. So the ADA, you know, better be sure before it makes some statement. And as a result, they oftentimes were silent. What we're trying to do now is help both our members and our science folks who work with this to say, well, we've got to be able to say what we do now know. Yeah. And at the same time, have the strength of courage to say, this is what we don't know. And say that publicly. Because then we'll become a deliverer of the factual information instead of some third party. Yeah. I mean, the worst thing that it seems to me that goes on is, you know, the media will take some new science, they'll wrap it in this clever 20-second spin to put on TV some way, somehow. They never can get into the depth of the real science that goes on with that, and they make it sound as though that it's something that it really isn't. And that's why you see one day it's a medical study that shows some drug works, and the next day you see some medical study that shows that that same drug or that same treatment regimen doesn't work. So that's the role, you know, that I think we can help play, because the consumers are out there wanting and demanding that kind of information. They're coming into the dental office saying, gee, I read this online someplace, you know, I see this spot in my mouth. Do I have, you know, this or that? Which is not bad to have the consumers more acutely aware of their dental problems. And it just requires us as practitioners to make sure we understand that that relationship that we used to have, where we had all the information and they had none, is changed.
And it's important, as I see these ADA alerts, which come out. Of course, I don't see many patients, but I talk to a lot of people, and it's important to read those things, because one of the problems I used to have was the dentist wasn't informed himself enough to respond to what we have. So
and remember,
I commend those. Those are great.
Well, thank you. I remember years ago, we were the distribution mechanism for information to the profession.
Yeah.
So we had some luxury of saying, okay, that'll go in the paper 2 weeks from now, or that'll go in the journal 3 months from now. Okay? Well, others circulate that information around. So we have to respond to that. We have to be out there with our view, our analysis, our take on that information, so that, you know, my members who are going to be seeing Mrs. Jones tomorrow, who may have read that herself.
She's going to ask.
She's going to ask, and I don't want my member coming up short somewhere, somehow.
Well, I think,
that's why we're trying to, which puts an incredible stress on resources. You can imagine, you know, what it takes then to have 2 and 3 and 4 parallel systems of information delivery at different time frames. You know, just because someone sends you something in a nanosecond, they're beginning to get the impression that you can respond in the same nanosecond. So their expectations are much higher of what we can do, and it takes a pretty significant infrastructure to support that in an effort to be seen by our members as valuable and timely and important and accurate. So you can imagine what that does for my communications staff, for example, or the science staff, that we know, if we know something's going to hit, but we don't know what that is. We just know that there's going to be a report. We have to gear up for 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of potential responses based upon, you know, what the information is, and then have those at the ready, so that when the information comes out, we can follow up with that. So.
Let me now shift to another subject, which is always, it seems to be in the front of a lot of people's minds, especially maybe people in the underserved area. How are we predicting the future of dental manpower to meet our needs and to meet the underserved?
Sure. Well, that's 2 different things. So I'll start with the manpower piece. There is continuing debate within the country as to whether we have a shortage of dentists or a maldistribution. Our view is that on a macro scale, when you look at the country as a whole, there are maldistributions. Other folks, you know, would argue that, you know, there's a shortage. I think if you throw both of those terms out, frankly, and just get down to, well, what's happening, it's easy to say that there's plenty of areas of the country where there's an awful lot of patients and nobody there to treat them.
Not being treated.
So now, you know, let's take a rural area, for example. I grew up in rural Iowa. The dentist that's there is still practicing, is in his 70s, and my mother tells me that, you know, he's talking with a young gentleman to perhaps come take over his practice. Fabulous. Okay? There's a lot of rural communities in Iowa where that's not happening, where there might not be anybody interested in coming back to take that practice. Why? Well, perhaps that's not the place that, those practitioners want to go live. I don't know. Perhaps there's other places that they've decided that I'd choose to live instead. So rural communities are having a lot of struggle. The same community that I grew up in never had a physician. He was there, moved to Sioux City, Iowa, shortly after we got to town. So here's a community, a rural community, in a county that we've been without physicians' health services for decades. There's probably communities in rural Nebraska or Colorado or Wyoming that don't have access to medical care. So putting health care services in a rural community has always been a problem. Always.
I turned down a practice in a rural community because I didn't want to live
And so I think we have to ask ourselves, there has to be different strategies for different kinds of places. A rural community is perhaps different than an underprivileged urban community with, an impoverished area, for example. Does the same strategy work for both of those? I don't think that it does. I think you need multiple strategies. So it's hard to attract people to some of those areas. There are programs out there that try to do that, loan forgiveness programs and incentive programs, some things like that, and some of those work pretty well. There are some new programs where some of the schools are trying to recruit students from those communities or from that area, train them in a more of a community-based focus in an attempt to say, well, with that kind of training, with that background, you'll more likely go back and practice in those areas. I think we'll need to watch that carefully to see whether that in fact happens. Do those folks actually return to those kinds of practices? I hope they do, because that's the concept under which that's been put together. So clearly there are areas where there aren't enough dentists based upon the population. What's often forgotten in the manpower debate that we factor into our model that isn't in a lot of other models is that we have a lot of data that shows how much more productive dentists have become year after year after year. The dentists as a whole in the United States are growing their productivity at about 1.2% per year. So if you just look at the raw numbers of dentists, okay, how many are graduating and how many are retiring, which, by the way, is there are more graduating than there are retiring. I hear some people say, well, gee, half of the dentists are going to retire, in the next 20 years. That's right. Half the engineers are going to retire in the next 20 years. Half of everybody's going to retire in the next 20 years. So, that's a statistic that doesn't, really doesn't hold a lot. There are more graduates graduating annually now than there are dentists retiring. So from a raw numbers standpoint, you have more inputs than you do outputs. And all of those people in the system are able to produce about 1.2% more per year. So that has to be factored in when you ask yourself, do you have enough people?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there problems? Are there enough support staff? Are there enough hygienists? Are there enough dental assistants? Those kinds of questions. Same issue. There's plenty of dentists who say, I've looked and looked and looked and I can't find a hygienist. There are other places that say, gee, I don't have a problem finding one. It takes support staff to become more productive, typically in a dental office. All of those things factor in. We've got then unique situations. We have a lot of discussion going on about rural Alaska now in the association and what kinds of support is up there. Does a community of 200 or 300 people 200 miles away by dog sled or snowplane, is that a different kind of environment and requires some different kind of creative thinking than what my rural town in rural Iowa does? I think a lot of people would say those are both rural, but they're different kinds. They're different kinds of rural. So one of the things that we've just recently done at the association is we're working on a workforce model that creates a couple of different kinds of new support individuals. And one of them we've termed a community-based health coordinator, which is designed as a person that can be an extender of either a dentist or a community health center to go out to teach education, to do sealant school programs, things of that nature, to help stabilize those patients until they can get referred, to be sort of a local person where a dentist might not necessarily be able to get out there. We think that holds some promise. There are some other models out there that we, mid-level providers that, depending upon what they do, we would either agree that that's a good idea or disagree that that's a good idea. I think the dental community would say that mid-level providers that are doing procedures that dentists should be doing is not a good idea. If they're doing support procedures that can help arrest disease or prevent disease. We've been the preventive profession for years, so it just seems like that makes sense. And those are the kinds of things that the association is working on. I think that sort of takes me to access to care. It gets talked about a lot, here at the association and around the country. And I think one of the things that's a bit of a bugaboo about access to care is it gets me back to that earlier thing that I said, is that a lot of people see that as one problem with one solution. So they sort of say, well, what's the solution to access to care? And it's just not. It's a problem that's going to have lots and lots of different kinds of solutions. It's going to have ways to recruit individuals that could serve those communities, underrepresented minorities, for example, recruiting those to dental school. Hopefully they'll go back and serve some of those communities. It's a way of teaching in the dental schools some of the more community-based skills that need to be going on there. It's an opportunity for us as a profession to say, what's your opportunity to go give back? What are those opportunities if they're out there to go do some volunteer work? What kinds of policies can we negotiate or advocate for in Washington that helps drive funding for some of those kinds of areas? All of that, it seems to me, grosses up as an opportunity for the profession to say, well, we're attacking access to care, but it's this multi-headed hydrant, so let's attack it with a multiple of solutions. Only then, I think, are we going to be very effective in beginning to kind of carve that back. Most of the decay, the statistic is out there, something like 20 or 25%, or excuse me, 80% of all the decays, and about 20 or 25% of the children these days, mostly from lower socioeconomic groups or places that don't have access to community-based water fluoridation or something like that. So, I think we know where the disease is at. I think we just got to put programs together that gets to them a little bit better. Fluoridation is a really great example.
Of course.
We've been, pushing that for so long, and the science is so robust on that, and yet the individuals who would argue that that's not appropriate, anti-fluoridationists, have the mechanisms to try and instill fear and mistrust or misunderstanding in individuals. The internet is a very good weapon for them to push around science that might not be quite so good.
With no accuracy.
And, we've got different ways of, years ago, a community-based system was about the only way to deliver that. Their argument is that there's lots of other ways to get, to be exposed to fluoride these days. So, okay, that's fine, but the exposure with a lot of those other mechanisms requires access to the dentist. It's hard to get a topical fluoride treatment if you aren't going to the dentist to go get it. So there's this huge role for community fluoridation, and its most effective place would be in those communities where they don't have necessarily the same access. So there's a lot of things that we could do, on a national scale to try to help that. When I was in Massachusetts, I was surprised that there were so many communities in Massachusetts that were still unfluoridated. It was amazing to me, in what I thought was probably going to be, a state that had one of the highest educational levels in the country, and you've got universities that are just, everywhere. And yet, its level of community-based water fluoridation was in the 50s, compared to some states that you might not have thought would have that high, that were, much higher than that. So there's still a lot of work to do, in water fluoridation.
Let me ask you one final question here. My grandson knocks on your door, and he says, Dr. Bramson, my dad's been telling me all this stuff. Grandfather's been telling me. I thought I'd go into dentistry, but it's very expensive, and it seems to be a problem. I'd like your advice. Should I go into dentistry now?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that there's many professions that I would even think are better than dentistry these days. I talk about the golden age of dentistry. To me, it's the platinum age. It's incredible. The opportunities are wonderful there. So my best answer would be absolutely. We find that the satisfaction levels with dentistry is very high. Their incomes are up in some respects. In a lot of respects, their incomes are actually higher than physicians. Our applicant pool to dental schools just continues to just grow increasingly large. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who apply to dental school who don't get in. The GPAs are going up, the DAT scores are going up. This is a highly competitive profession for people to get into, and that's because it's very desirable. If you sort of say, are there issues in front of dentistry today that are going to be challenging? You bet. Were there challenging issues in front of dentistry 25 years ago? Absolutely. And were they just as daunting and just as challenging back then? My guess is yes, okay? My guess is that those folks who looked at those said, good golly, how are we going to solve this problem? Yeah. And son of a gun, it either went away or it got solved. I think that same thing is in front of us today. They're just different challenges. So I don't know of too many jobs, so to speak, that offer the kind of flexibility, the kind of entrepreneurship, the kind of opportunity, and the kind of, for lack of another word, the ability to sort of plan your own sort of destiny, so to speak. I hate to use the word control because I think dentists they like control issues.
That's probably conservative.
But, it's a very a wonderful place that has relatively few outsiders managing or controlling what goes on compared to a host of other industries out there. Now, a general dentist might say, but we've got, I don't know, OSHA or third-party interference or something. Well, compare that to, other fields.
Peanuts.
And there's rules and regulations that govern all kinds of things, and you just don't know about them because you're not in somebody else's business.
Yeah.
You're in this business, so you think that you're being inappropriately regulated or something like that. I think we need to continue to guard against overextensive regulations and things that just don't seem to make sense, and I think the association's done a good job in doing that. But when I look at what's on the horizon for dentistry and where it's going to go, the sky's the limit. I mean, the technology that's coming down the pike to help dentists be better diagnosticians or to deliver their care better. I mean, I remember when I was in dental school, dental implants were poo-pooed as something that didn't work.
Yeah.
And now
practice.
there's just,
It's
common. So, we are very high-tech. We are moving closer and closer to integrating and understanding those oral systemic associations. That research continues. That's going to do nothing but elevate dentistry, it seems to me, as a needed and valuable healthcare service. The mouth's connected to the body, the old thing that goes on there. I mean, the one that I really like to watch the most is some of this salivary diagnostic stuff that's coming down the pike that sort of says to me, what better example do we have of where technology and treatment come together? Is that, can that help a dentist understand their patients better? You bet. Is that same diagnostic information going to help the physician understand their patients better? Sure. Doesn't that sort of bring us and the physicians closer together in cooperative ways to understand and treat the patient? So to me, that says it's a whole new sort of, time out there for us to move into as a broader, bigger, more meaningful player in the, in the healthcare system. What could be more attractive than that?
Well, I appreciate you telling my grandson that, because that's about exactly what I told him.
Good.
Now, I don't know what he's going to do.
Well, show him this tape.
Yeah, I don't know what he's going to do. Well, I do appreciate the time you spent. I know that you're busy and have to go someplace else at this point. Having been in dentistry much longer than you, 50 years now, and having been a member of the American Dental Association, I can say that it has done a lot for me personally, and has done a lot for the Navy Dental Corps, and it's done a lot for dentistry as a whole, and I wouldn't see why anybody would not appreciate what you're doing now. The challenges that are going to face us are going to be some we haven't even thought of.
Absolutely.
But that's why we have you there, and I hear wonderful things about what you personally are doing.
Well, thank you very much.
And appreciate your time
I hope those people keep saying nice things.
You're truly a leader in dentistry.
Well, I appreciate
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Be well.